Part 3 of Kircher's Egyptian Chronology. Dynastia XVI Pastorum durat annos centissimo trio. Dynastiam Thebaiorum sequitur Dynastia Pastorum sic dicta, vel quod eam vigente, filii Jacob qui pastores erant teste sacra scriptura, in Aegyptum descedentes ibi sedem fixerint, quem ad modum Eusibius et Genebrardus sentiunt. Vel quod regum tum rerum in Aegypto potientum opes in pecoribus erant positae, uti vult Manethus. Qui vero hi reges, quae erorum nomina fuerunt, difficile est asserere, praesertim cum Eusibius, quem nos, quantum fiere potest, sequi statuimus, nullius mentionem fecerit. Ali vero etsi quorundum hanc dynastiam dominantium meminerint, ita tamen confusim deis scripserunt, ut quid credendum neutiquam discipi possit. Varonitici tamen imperii nitum ab hac dynastia fuisse. Adeo certum est, ut qui ei contradicat, sacris literis id aperte asserentibus contradicere videatur. Nam et Pharaonem regem Aegypti saram abrahae uxorum repuisse. Pharaonem quoque regem Iosepum dominum Aegypti constituisse, notius est. Quam dici debeat, quaecum ita sint, videamus nunc quis ex hac dynastia in Aegypto primus post Deos regnaverit. Chronicon Alexandrinum Sesostrin ponit, quem et cum Mercurio Trismegisco confundit, peperam, quia id historiae et omnium chronologorum sententiae repugnat, uti inferius videbitur, nisi Sesostrin corrupte pro Sesosiri, quod Osiris germen significat, positum fuisse esseramus. Alii apidem primum regem statuerunt, eo quod Kircher principium quios dynastiae in Aegypto floruerit, in numerum deorum possea relatus. Quem serapim vocaverunt, de quo suo loco, alii mesrem aut mesrem, Osiridem alii, nos securissimam viam tenere volentes, menam cum Herodito et Diodoro statuimus. Sic enim ait. Primum post Deos in Aegypto regnasse ferunt menam, qui populos colere Deos sacraque his facere, mensa sunt semper et lecto sternere docuit, deliciis asue faciens et cultiore vitae. Utrum autem mitres, mitras aut misrem, qui teste Plinio primus obeliscum reperisse digitur, idem sit cum Mena, primo Aegyptiorum rege, et Pharaone non facile assue reto. Praesertim cum et menas lunam et mitres solem significet, utrumque apud Aegyptios numen in magna veneratione, et cultu habitum, quorum alterum Osirim, alterum Isim vocabant. Herodotus certe et Diodorus nusqua mitrae regis, quod sciam mentionem faciunt. Eusibius autem in Dynastia Politanorum, quortum ei locum assignat, ut in tanta rerum ac nominum obscuritate nil nobis reliquum nisi conjecturae sint. Nominum autem confusio in de orta videtur, quod cum in Aegypto simul regnarint, non nisi paucorum nomina memoriae mandata a scriptoribus sint. Ac non eadem ab omnibus omnia, sed ab alis alia, pro ut quisque e sacerdotibus, quibus actorum conscribendorum cura incumebebat, hunc aut illum regem vel amabant vel oderant. Quare apud Diodorum legimus inter Ucoreum et Sesostrin de viginti aetates annos scilicit quingentos septuaginta inter Cessisse, cum interea praeter maeridem nullus, qui Aegypto imperarit, neque ad Diodoro ut dictum est, neque ab Herodoto nominetur, cum autem Eusibius horum nusquam meminerit, aliorum vere meminerit, verisimile est a Manetho, quem ipse sequabatur, silentio fuisse praeteritus, itemque alios ab aliis, quorum fidem et scripta Herodotus et Diodorus secuti sunt. Mirum sane est, ut eo unde discessimus redeamus, quod Herodotus mennam illud fuisse scribat, qui memphim condidit, quam ab ucoteo conditam fuisse, Diodorus testator, annis scilicet post Thebas conditas millesimo triginte quinque, Eusibius autem ab Epapho, Jovis et ius filio memphim condita memorat, Graecorum commenta et fabula secutus, apud quos tamen Epaphum fuisse Aegyptium confidentur omnes. Aiunt enim io post multos errores in Aegyptum pervenisse, ibique Iovi pristinae formae restitutam et compressam peperisse Epaphum, aquote inde Memphis originem habuerit suam. Quin etiam Herodotus scribit appim bovem a Graecis vocare Epaphum, ut huius modi nomine significetur, vel homo aliquis certus, vel bellua, quae apud Aegyptios sit. Quando enim multas urbes Pindarus ab Epapho in Aegypto conditas fuisse testator, ita canit. Pulla de Aegyptoi catocethen acer Epaphus palamais. Et quidam facilis est transitus ex Appi in Epaphum, et ab Appi legibus Memphim conditam esse, et Appim ipsum primum fuisse, qui in Aegypto Deus appellatus sit, et Serapis cognomimatus, ut Appis bos, Appis Deus, Appis Memphis conditor, uno nomine a Graecis Epaphus appelletur. Sed ille sive Ucoreus, sive Epaphus, sive euterque unus et idem fuerit, a Graecis alter ad Aegyptiis nominatus, aeundem sane dicimus esse, nam constat ex Eusebio Memphim ab eo fuisse conditam, anno munde 3.070. Verum ut in tanta difficultatae rerum aliquid certe tandem statuatur, duo nobis probanda erunt. Primum est utrum Menas, Mithras, Misraem, Osiris, Ucorius, quorum regnum in hac dynastia a diversis sit mentio, idem sint an diversi. Alterum si Mempeos conditores extitadint, an non, quibus expeditis aliquid saltem luminis me subeditaturum confido. Dicimus itaque ad primum, Menam et Mithram eundem omnino esse, rationem damus, quae cumque de Mena decuntur a Diodoro, ea omnia de Mitre seu Mithra decuntur a Plinio, sic enim aet de obeliscis loquens. Trabes ex eo fecerunt reges, quodam cerdamine obeliscos vocantes, solis numini sacratos. Radiorum eis argumentum in effigie est, et ita significat nomini Aegyptio, primus omnium id instituit Mitres, qui in urbe solis, Heliopolis eo Thebis intellige, primus regnabat, somnia iusus et hoc ipsum scriptum in eo. Ex quibus verbis collige primo, fuisse primum regem in Aegypto Mitrem, eiumque Misram. Secundo eum divina missione monitum, deinde monitu hermetis consilarii sui cultum solis, eiusque sacrificia instituisse, itque per erectionem obeliscorum radio solares mentientium, quae menae quoque convenire ex Diodoro apertum est, sic enim scribit. Primum post Deos in Aegypto regnasse ferunt Menam, qui populos colere deos sacra quis facere, mensa sin super ect lectulo sternere docuit. Uter quigitur primus rex, uterque primus cultus deorum, eorumque sacrificorum autor menas et mitras acitatis autoribus constituitur. Hanc tantum differentiam, quod ille ab Aegyptis, ab lunae cultum forsan, menas, hic mitras ab solis, ignisque cultum ab Persis et Arabibus, ad quos ex Aegypto profectus est, testa didoro sic vocitatus. Is positis mirum non est, alios primum Aegypti regem posuisse Osirim, alios vexorum aut vecorum, cum Osiris cum Mitra passim confudatur, ut in obelisco Pamphilio fusse probamus. Vexorum autem seu Eucorium eundem quoque cum Osiridi a Sabellico suspicator Genebrardus, sic enim dicit. Vexores rex Aegypti in pontum usque victor arma ferens. Et Paulo post, fortasis vexores est Osiris, Pharaonem primus. Dicimus igitur Mitram, menam seu Mitrem eundem esse cum Misraim, filio Cham, cuius consilarius Mercurius, Isis uxor, et filius Horus Mesramutosis, quae omnia fusse deducta et demonstrata vide in obelisco Pamphilio. Nisi quis menam cum isi confundere velit, quam lunam veteres dixerunt, poterit is liciten tanta nominum confusione facere. Cum et ex Diodoro constet, Osirin regni curam isidi commissa, urbem terrae peragrasse. Isis itaque sive luna, pro mena facila posteris, nullam sexus habitam ratione pro primo rege Aegypti accipi potuit. Restat altera difficultas soluenda circa Memphis conditorum, atque Herodotus quidem menam Memphis conditorum dicit, qui Josephus apud Genebrardum a stipulantur, Josephi verba sunt sequentia. Ob hoc mene, qui primus extitit rex, id unde fluit amnis, effectum terrestre, ebique ab eodem urbem hanc conditam, quae nunc Memphis dicitur. Genebrardi vero textus sic sonat. A Menaio rege Aegypti Memphis conditur, hic aucta est idololatria a posteris Cham misram Aegyptiae gentis autore, et quos Aethiopicae. Nam sub hoc Aegypti omnium primi aras sacrificia et delubra diis instituerunt. Quae superius de Mena et Mitre dictis optime conveniunt. Cum itaque Menas Memphis conditor acitatis autoribus dicatur, ab Eusebio vero e Paphus dubium non exiguum oritur, quomodo isti autores intelligendi sint. Hoc itaque ut solatur. Sciendum est circa eadam tempora, quam Menas primus in Aegypto regni tenebat gubernacula, inacum apud Arcos prima quoque regni argivorum fundamenta iacisse, erat huic filia Io nomine, quam post modum eo quod sub bovina forma visa esset, mutato nomine Isidem appellarunt. Erat inaco quoque filius Foronaius, qui et bos Foronaius appellatus est, patris in argivorum regnos ocessor, qui apis tertius archivorum rex denique successit, qui resignato regno Aegyalaio, ipse cum suis in Aegyptum migravit, ubi divinos honores meruit, Serapis vocatus. Ex tribus itaque his bovina metamorphoso infamibus regibus, apide boe Foronaio et bovina Iside, nil facilius fuit, praesertim Aegyptiis omnibus ad fingendum pro Nisis, quam unum aliquem Epaphum conflare. Quam quia eo ipso tempore, quam Menas Memphim condebat, floruis sciebant, conditorem psius dicebant, eiquin eodem loco asse condito post modum bovem, in quem transmutatus credebatur, in septo quodam nutriebant, quem apim dicebant. Praeterea cum sub idem tempus utidiximus menas mitras, Osiris et vexores seu vecorius, divers in uno comprehensi reges regnarint. Osiris autem sicut et persarum mitras, quem eondem commene diximus, sub forma bovis colerentur, mirum nemini videre debet, si primum Aegypti regem et conditorum Memphis promiscuam denominatione, nunc menam, nunc mitram, nunc Osirin, vexorem aut vecorium, eadam uni tertio, eadam sunt interse, nam et rerum gestarum simultudine, et si diversa unum tamen exprimiebat, hinc etiam ab autoribus haec et similia nomina passim confuduntur. Sed de mitra Misraem Osiride, qui plura desiderat, consulat obeliscum Pampilium, nos haec ideo fusius tractanda putavimus, ut quanda in aequi vocatione nominum vis esset in chronicis probe diunciandis, dictis monstraremus, nunc ad alia. The 16th dynasty of Shepherds, which ruled for 103 years. The Theban dynasty was followed by the so-called Shepherd dynasty, either because during its reign the sons of Jacob, who were shepherds, as the Holy Scripture testifies, descended into Egypt and made a home there, as Eusebius and Genebrard write, or alternatively because the wealth of the kings who then held power in Egypt was placed into cattle, as Manetho believes. But who these kings were, what names of the heroes were, is difficult to assert, especially since Eusebius, whom we have decided to follow as close as possible, makes no mention of any of them. Others, however, although they remember certain rulers of this dynasty, have written about them in such a confused manner that it is impossible to discern what is to be believed. However, it is so certain that the Pharaonic Empire began with this dynasty that whoever contradicts him is seen to contradict the sacred writings which openly affirm it. As it is well known that Pharaoh, king of Egypt, abducted Sarah, Abraham's wife, and that Pharaoh also made Joseph a lord of Egypt. With these things being so, let us now see who of this dynasty reigned first in Egypt after the gods. The Alexandrian Chronicle incorrectly places Sesostris, whom it also confuses with Mercury Trismegistus. But this is contrary to history and the opinion of all other chronologists, as will be seen below. Unless Sesostrin could be a corruption of Sesosiri, which means the offspring of Osiris. Some have placed Apis as the first king, because he flourished in Egypt about the beginning of this dynasty, and was afterwards included among the number of the gods, whom they called Seraphis, from which he took his place. Others have placed Mefre or Mesre, others Osiris. We, wishing to take the safest course, have placed Mena, in agreement with Herodotus and Diodorus. For he writes thus: They say that the first to reign in Egypt after the gods was Menas, who taught the people to worship the gods, to perform rituals for them, and to spread tables and beds, accustoming the people to pleasures and a more cultured life. But whether Mitres, Mithras, or Misraim, who, according to Pliny, is said to have been the first to invent the obelisk, is the same as Menas, the first king and pharaoh of the Egyptians, I cannot easily assert, especially since both Mena signifies the moon and Mitres means the sun, both of which gods were held in great veneration and worship among the Egyptians, of whom they equated one to be Osiris and the other to be Isis. Herodotus, certainly, and Diodorus nowhere, as far as I can tell, make any mention of King Mithras. But Eusebius, in his Dynasty of the Paulitans, assigns to him the fourth place, so that in such an obscurity of facts and names, nothing is left to us but conjecture. Now the confusion of names seems to have arisen from the fact that when they reigned together in Egypt, the names of only a few were committed in memory by the scribes, and not all of them were the same, but different from each other, according as each of the priests, to whom the care of writing down their acts was committed, as they either loved or hated this or that king. Wherefore we read in Diodorus that between Okoreus and Sesostris 19 ages, or 570 years, had passed, while in the meantime, apart from Myris, no one who ruled Egypt is named, either by Diodorus, as has been said, or by Herodotus. But since Eusebius nowhere mentions these, he does indeed mention others. It is probable that they were passed over in silence by Manetho, whom he himself followed, and likewise others by others, whose faith and writings Herodotus and Diodorus then followed. And so it is remarkable indeed that we might return now to where we left off. For Herodotus writes that Menas was the one who founded Memphis, which Diodorus testifies to have been founded by Eucoretus, namely 1,035 years after the founding of Thebes. But Eusebius records that Memphis was founded by Epaphus, a son of Jupiter in Io, following the myths and fables of the Greeks, among whom, moreover, all admit that Epaphus was an Egyptian. For they say that Io, after her many wanderings, eventually arrived in Egypt, and there, having been restored by Jupiter to her original form, became pregnant, and then gave birth to Epaphus, from whom Memphis then had its origin. Moreover, Herodotus also writes that the Greeks called Epaphus the ox, so that by this name either some certain man or certain beast which exists among the Egyptians might be signified. For when Pindar testifies, many cities were founded by Epaphus in Egypt, he sings thus: Pola de Aegyptoi kato kethen aseto Epapho palamais. At that time, among the Egyptians, there were founded by Epaphus many palaces. And indeed it is easy to pass from Apis to Epaphus, and we read that Memphis was founded by Apis, and that Apis himself was the first to be called a god in Egypt, and was surnamed Serapis, so that Apis the ox, Apis the god, and Apis the founder of Memphis is called by the single name Epaphus by the Greeks. But whether he was Eucoreus or Epaphus, or whether both were one and the same, named one by the Greeks, the other by the Egyptians, we certainly say that he is the same. For it is clear from Eusebius that Memphis was founded by him in the year of the world 3700. But in order that something may be finally established with certainty in such a difficult matter, two things must first be proved to us. The first being Armenes, Mithras, Misraim, Osiris, Eucoreus, whose kings are mentioned by different people in this dynasty, the same or different. The second thing, whether the founders of Memphis really existed or not. I am confident I will provide at least some light on these matters. To which we therefore say, firstly, that Mena and Mithras are one and the same. We give the reason because whatever is said about Mena by Diodorus, the same is said about Mithra or Mithra by Pliny. For thus he says, speaking of the obelisks, kings would make beams from it, calling them obelisks, sacred to the sun god, in a certain contest. The proof of its rays is in the energy, and so it is signified by its Egyptian name. The first of all to establish it was Mithras, who was the first to reign in the city of the sun, understood to mean Heliopolis or Thebes, commanded by a dream, and this very thing is written on it. From which words gathered, firstly, that the first king in Egypt was Mithras, and that this was Misraim. Secondly, that he was warned by a divine vision, and then, by the advice of his counselor Hermes, that he instituted the worship of the sun and its sacrifices, and this by erecting obelisks that reflected the sun's rays. This is clear from Diodorus that it also applied to Mena, for he writes thus: "They say that Mena reigned first in Egypt after the gods, who taught the people to worship the gods, to make sacrifices to them, and to spread tables and beds." Therefore, both the first king and the first author of the worship of the gods and their sacrifices are established by our cited authors as Menas and Mithras, with the only difference that the Egyptians called him Menas, because of their worship of the moon, and the Persians and Arabs called him Mithras, because of their worship of the sun and fire, to which peoples he went from Egypt, according to the testimony of Diodorus. Now then, having set forth these things, it is not surprising that some have placed Osiris as the first king of Egypt, others Wexor or Wekorus, since Osiris is everywhere confused with Mithras, as we amply prove in the obelisk of Pampilius. But Genebrard of Sapelicus suspects that Wexor or Ukorus is also the same as Osiris, for he says thus: Wexores, king of Egypt, victorious, carrying his arms all the way to Pontus. And a little while later, perhaps Wexores is the first of the Osiris pharaohs. We therefore say that Mithras, Mena, or Mithrem is the same as Misraim, the son of Ham, whose counselor was Mercury, Isis his wife, and Horus, the son of Methramutis, all of which is explained and demonstrated in detail in our Pamphylian obelisk. Not unless anyone wishes to confuse Mena with Isis, whom the ancients called the moon, he may lawfully do so in such a confusion of names, since it is also clear from Diodorus that Osiris, entrusted with the care of the kingdom to Isis, traveled the world. Therefore Isis, or moon, could easily be taken by posterity for Mena, no matter what gender she was, for the first king of Egypt. There remains another difficulty to be solved concerning the founder of Memphis, and Herodotus indeed calls Menas the founder of Memphis, to whom Josephus ascribes his name in the writings of Genebrard. Josephus's words are as follows: "From this Mene, who was the first king, that from which the river flows, the effect of the earth, and thence from him was founded the city which is now called Memphis." The text of Genebrard reads as follows: "Memphis was founded by Minaus, king of Egypt. Here idolatry was increased by the descendants of Cham, the founder of the Egyptian nation, Misraim, and Cush, the Ethiopian. For under him the Egyptians were the first of all to establish altars, sacrifices, and temples to the gods." Which words agree very well with what was said above concerning Mena and Mithras. But since therefore Menas is called the founder of Memphis by the authors cited, but Epaphus by Eusebius, no small doubt arises as to how these authors are to be understood. Let this therefore be resolved. It should be noted that around the same time that Menas was the first to hold the reins of the kingdom in Egypt, Inachus also laid the first foundations of the kingdom of Archons. He had a daughter named Io, whom they later changed her name to Isis, because she had been seen in the form of a cow. Inachus also had a son, Pharoneus, who was called Pharoneus the Ox, who succeeded his father in the kingdom of the Argives. He was finally succeeded by Apis, the third Argive king, who, having resigned the kingdom of Aegyptiacus, himself migrated with his people over to Egypt, where he earned divine honors, being called Serapis. And so from these three infamous kings, Apis, the Pharaonian ox, and the bovine Isis. Nothing was simpler, especially for the Egyptians, who were quite fond of making up fables, than to cast one, Epaphus, whom they knew to have flourished at the same time that Menas founded Memphis, they called its founder. And in the same place, having been founded by him, they afterwards raised in a certain enclosure the ox into which he was believed to have been transformed, whom they called Apis. Furthermore, since at the same time, as we have said, reigned Menas, Mithras, Osiris, and Vexores, or Uecorius, were all different kings included in one. Osiris, however, like the Persian Mithras, whom we have called the same as Mene, was worshipped in the form of a bull. It should seem strange to no one if they first called the king of Egypt and the founder of Memphis by a promiscuous name. Now Mene, now Mithra, now Osiris, Vexor or Vecorium, now Epaphus or Apides, according to that common saying of philosophers, that which is the same in 1/3 is the same among themselves. For by the similarity of events, although different, they nevertheless expressed one thing. Hence also these and similar names are everywhere confused by the authors. But concerning Mithra, Misraim, and Osiris, he who desires more should consult our obelisk of Pamphilus. We thought these things should be treated at greater length there, so that we might show by the words spoken how great the power of equivocation of names was in the accurate judgment of the chronicles. Now on to other things.